Horror cinema has had a long love affair with insects, arachnids, and other creepy crawlies. Few images send shivers up our spines like those of insects. No wonder, as insects are fundamentally unknowable creatures. They exist as parasites. They are invasive, and they consume our corpses, feeding off us after we're dead.
Get him off of me! Get him off of me! They're all over me! Get him off!
Filmmakers often use insects as shorthand for terror. H.R. Giger's design for the xenomorph basically combines phallic imagery with insect aesthetics. One of the most memorable moments in The Thing has the shape-shifting creature emulate a spider. In Stephen King's It, we also get a spider in the climactic showdown with Pennywise. And robotic designs often emulate bugs and other critters to highlight the alien nature of the mechanical enemy. Yes, when it comes to insects, horror filmmakers have an easy go-to for repulsive imagery that is sure to affect audiences, creeping them out. Cinema history is filled with various subgenres of insect-themed horror and science fiction films. Let's take a look at them, at why they affect us, what they represent, and at why, just perhaps, this is one horror subgenre that should be retired. Though, before I dive into the wild world of slithering creepies, I'm making a couple of exclusions. We'll not be looking at worms, which sadly means no deep dive into one of my all-time favorites, the charming Tremors. I'm also skipping several slimier members of the slithering world, so no mollusks, like in The Monster That Challenged the World, or angry overgrown sea cucumbers, like in the amusing Deep Rising. And no parasites, because while several insects are parasitical, so many Parasite movies tend to feature aliens, like this one, the Puppet Masters, or this one, Slithers. They all come close, but they aren't exactly insects or arachnids, so out they go. The most obvious use of insects in genre cinema is for shock value. Bugs creep people out, so it makes sense that filmmakers would use them to play on audience revulsions. In the teenage fantasy witch thriller The Craft, the bad witches torture the good witch with illusions of slithering things, and Robin Tunney is seriously creeped out. It's an effective scene, but it is there purely for shock value. Nothing previous in the film is insect-themed. The use of bugs is just to get that icky factor before our heroine rises above it and fights back. While most horror films go with spiders and cockroaches and scorpions, sometimes filmmakers are a bit more adventurous. In The Unborn, the bugs again are used for their ick factor, but in this film, we get a pretty damn cool one featuring Jerusalem crickets. That thing is pretty awesome looking, but in the film it is just there to creep you out. In the sci-fi film Snowpiercer, the lower-class passengers' revolt is partially justified by a big twist revelation. This is a story about people surviving on a perpetually moving train while the world outside has turned to ice. I sincerely doubt these people would have been upset to discover they were eating insects. It's not like they've been fed Soylent Green.
Soylent Green is people!
Or have they?
I know what people taste like. I know that babies taste best.
Then again, this film isn't very logical, and it isn't meant to be. Snowpiercer is a parable, a metaphor, but it still always bothered me that eating bugs was portrayed as such a big deal. Humans are actually eating insects all around the world, and here in the West, we're slowly reacquainting ourselves with the practice. Bugs are also used as metaphors for evil. In Exorcist II, the heretic, locusts are harbingers. And historically, this makes sense. These things ate crops and caused famine. In the Americas, some 150 years ago, the Rocky Mountain locust roamed the prairies, Laws were passed demanding that able-bodied men between 16 and 60 spend 2 working days a week eradicating them. It was thought to be an impossible task, as the swarms measured in the dozens of trillions. Yes, trillions. Never underestimate humans. By the 20th century, the Rocky Mountain locust vanished. It was finally declared extinct in 2014. Good for farmers, maybe, but one has to ask, what consequences are we today suffering because of this extinction? That brings us to bees. Sadly, they are beginning to disappear. But while the locust ate the crops, the bees pollinated. Losing them would be disastrous for mankind. No, not just mankind, for life on Earth. A few horror movies have been made about killer bees, but they are generally lackluster, from the cheesy The Deadly Bees in 1966 to the ludicrous telepathic bees in The Bees from 1978 to the Irving Allen disaster movie The Swarm, also from 1978. Bees never seem to work as movie monsters. We have domesticated them, sort of, and we live with them, harvesting their honey. So let's look at more invasive creatures, like cockroaches and spiders. In Creepshow, the nastiness of cockroaches is on full display. There doesn't seem to be much use for cockroaches. They are a pest. Though, is that true? In nature, cockroaches are recyclers, serving an important ecological role, and cockroach feces is a vital source of nourishment for plants and trees. You know, those green things that produce oxygen. In this case, instead of treating cockroaches like enemy threats as in Creepshow, perhaps we should take a cue from Joe's apartment. Though I'll readily admit, if I see a cockroach inside, I kill it. Speaking of killing insects inside our homes, most people have a fear of spiders. And some spiders are genuinely a threat, like black widows and brown recluses, and whatever these fictional buggers are in the entertaining 1990s horror film Arachnophobia. Though, some months ago I had a silverfish invasion in my bathroom. Along came a spider, but instead of killing it, I let it stay. A few weeks later, and there were no more silverfish. The lesson seems to be, bugs are useful, but that doesn't make them any easier to be around. Especially when they get inside our newly invented teleporters, fusing our DNA with theirs, creating monstrosities. Poor scientist André Delambre is not having the best of days in his laboratory. The Fly franchise is one of the most effective sci-fi horror series made. It was based on a 1957 short story by French-British author Georges Langelaan. The first film adaptation was made in 1958, and it is a fairly accurate adaptation of the story. It is also one of the most disturbing genre films of the 1950s, powerful and revolting to this day. A big part of that is the concept of fusing fly parts onto a human, which also begs the question for the unfortunate inventor: how long does a housefly live? The film's effectiveness is its use of insect body parts as a metaphor for disease. Take your pick: tumors, infections, cancer, things we really do not like. 2 sequels followed, but neither of them made much of an impact on horror cinema. They continued the concept set forth in the first film, with Return of the Fly adding the idea of hereditary idiocy. The son of the inventor from the first film hasn't inherited his father's disease, just his carelessness. After an episode with a guinea pig being a literal guinea pig, young Philippe Delambre makes the same mistakes as his father, though the film has a happier final outcome. The third Fly movie, Curse of the Fly, continued the Delambre family legacy, but this time actually adding hereditary disease as a component of the plot. Now, with the rapid aging gene of a fly, Martin Delambre must use a serum to keep himself young. This begs the question, who the hell is Martin Delambre? And for that matter, who the hell is his father, Henri Delambre? And how are they related to André and Philippe Delambre from the first 2 movies? Heck if I know. Anyway, this one had a bleaker ending, with Henri vanishing into the void and Martin aging out quickly. Curse of the Fly is a forgotten film, perhaps justly so. But unlike the previous sequel in the franchise, this one was interesting because the immediate effect of the insectal infestation wasn't a few traded body parts, but rather altered DNA, which was also the route chosen for the 1986 David Cronenberg remake. In this updated version of the story, Seth Brundle also shares a teleporter with a housefly, but the effects aren't immediate. They are gradual, which makes for a far more compelling narrative. It also resulted in one of the best horror films of the 1980s. The Fly is remarkable because of the way it approaches the nature of the insect. Yes, the transformations are grotesque and terrifying, but Seth Brundle also sees the advantages of his new form.
I seem to be stricken by a disease with a purpose, wouldn't you say?
Like an insect, he becomes powerful. Like world champion arm wrestler powerful. And he makes short work of his romantic rivals. Though, he also loses touch with his humanity. And that is perhaps what scares us the most about the insect. Its inability to reason and feel like a human. In the end, Brundle's human side wins out, even as he's transforming into a fully grotesque creature. It is a Hail Mary last move from his human side, allowing his love interest to put him out of his misery. Though to be fair, he was already a bit squashed at this point. The Fly 2 was a more standard horror film, and it didn't manage to live up to the storytelling strengths of the David Cronenberg film. The thematic elements of Seth Brundle's insect side were too strong. His Brundle Fly was brutal and without remorse. And like his fellow insects, he was a nasty looking little thing. Or not so little, actually. Quite big, in fact. But he was far from the biggest. Humans have been fascinated with titanic threats since the age of mythology. In 1933, King Kong made apes big, fighting dinosaurs. A sequence cut from the original film included a pit filled with spiders and other bugs. The scene is now lost, but it was an early example of giant bugs on screen. Once the 1950s rolled around, and the splitting of the atom produced gigantic monsters, in fiction that is, it was only natural that insects would join the fray. Perhaps the most effective one was Them from 1954, where the gigantic ants become harbingers of doom, this time with a Book of Revelation's Armageddon component added to the mix.
We may be witnesses to a biblical prophecy come true. And there shall be destruction and darkness come upon creation, and the beast shall reign over the earth.
The giant ants terrorize communities, and I can easily believe it. An often repeated online factoid claims that the cumulative weight of all ants on Earth is greater than the cumulative weight of all the humans. I don't know if that is true, but it sounds plausible. What is true is that ants are some of the most useful and effective creatures on the planet. And if they were any bigger than an average house cat, we humans would be in deep shit. Them was a smash hit, and as the first gigantic monster film to focus exclusively on insects, it was soon copied. The formula was repeated in Tarantula, a somewhat minor effort, but interesting in that it also included a bit of body horror. The serum that enlarged the spider also wreaked havoc on the scientist, deforming him. We'd see more of this 3 decades later, thanks to David Cronenberg. More giant bug movies followed, including enemy mantises, plus-sized scorpions, and even a big moth for Godzilla to fight. Giant spiders were particularly popular, with a series of low-budget chillers featuring them. And whenever space invaders came, they bore the guise of giant bugs. Insects were like Nazis, the perfect villain. You could squash them, and it wouldn't matter, because they were just bugs, right? But insects are more than that. Guillermo del Toro often uses insects for atmosphere and allegory, but there isn't a hatred of bugs in his works. Instead, they are more like symbols of the unknown or the spirit world or the otherworldly. And Dario Argento, in Phenomena, uses insects as a conveyor of information. In that film, a young Jennifer Connelly uses her psychic powers to communicate with the bugs so that she can track down a serial killer. We're starting to see here a new view of bugs. They are more useful, natural, and not just something we can squash, or worse, exterminate like the Rocky Mountain locust. In Ant-Man and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, ants are allies, helping the heroes on their quests. And that's more true to the nature of ants. They are necessary creatures we should and must protect. Because I have bad news for you. The Rocky Mountain locusts aren't the only bugs being exterminated. Over the past few decades, insect populations all across the globe have fallen dramatically.
Fire! Cease fire! They're just camel spiders! They're not even poisonous!
And what do you think happens if there are no bugs? Pretty much this. Wasteland. A dead earth. It isn't Atlas that holds the world on his shoulders. It is bugs. Life is built on insects. This planet can endure the absence of humans. It cannot endure the absence of bugs. Without them, the entire system collapses. I'm not saying you can't kill bugs in your house. They don't belong inside. But I am saying we must collectively take steps to protect insects. And part of that is changing our outlook. Instead of automatically killing bugs, of spraying, of draining swamps to get rid of mosquitoes, perhaps we should protect them, and thus protect ourselves. And to that end, reframing the narrative is necessary. I love a good bug horror movie as much as the next guy, but I'm seriously starting to wonder if the subgenre is helping. Using insects as visual harbingers of death is an outdated way to view the world. For if we couldn't see bugs at all, if they were all gone, then we'd soon follow. And that is truly a horrifying thought. My name is Wolfcraft. You've been watching History of Horror. If you enjoyed the episode, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Join me next time for episode 20, Hunting the Most Dangerous Game. I'm also a novelist. My science fiction novel, God of Desolation, is available on Amazon, both in print and via Kindle. And my upcoming mystery novel, Richly Drawn, will soon be available for pre-order on inkshares.com. Check them out. And thanks aplenty.